everyone, welcome to another Overrated Film Saturday. I apologize that these videos are being uploaded late. There has been some issues with me being able to upload videos for some time. For some reason, YouTube just takes forever to upload them. However, I've been fortunately able to get two that I wanted to upload on time. Or at least one of them I wanted to upload on time, but unfortunately I wasn't able to do that because it was for some reason giving me these very long-winded times to ultimately upload. So I thought, okay, there must be something wrong with my connection or whatnot. So unfortunately I've had to delay things, but I should be caught up by the end of today. So without further ado, let me discuss what I wanted to discuss for this Overrated Film Saturday, and that is the Pirates sequels. Yes, I'm talking Pirates of the Caribbean. And I'm talking films 2, 3, and 4. Not the first film, because the first film, although you could maybe even say that 2 is a little bit overpraised, it still is genuinely fun, I think, overall, and people, I think, really didn't get as, I think, into the Pirates films all that much until they started kind of churning out these sequels. And that's where I think it's really started the trend of these films getting a little bit overrated and praised. And even the more recent film, the fourth one, although I think they made some positive changes, they ultimately did not make the changes that really were kind of consistent to the other sequels. And unfortunately, that's where the fourth film ends up kind of not living up to its full potential. So, without further ado, let me address these sequels in a more general sense and why I think they're a little bit overpraised for what they are. First off, I think the reason why these films got so much money and so much hype was the fact that it was Pirates of the Caribbean. Let's first get that out of the way, because that's really true when you look at the popularity surrounding the ride at Disney, the initial popularity when the first film came out. Everybody was kind of hyped into going into seeing another film, and another film, and then another film. And I think largely the reason is I think people like these kinds of films because they're not the traditional Disney. They kind of don't gravitate to that very kid friendly, oriented kind of material. The Pirates films, they're relatively dark. They're about adventure. There's violence and there's romance. It's more PG-13 oriented than PG or G oriented Disney. So I think that's one of the reasons as well why a lot of people wanted to see a more adult kind of Disney film as opposed to a lot of the other films that they've made over the years, which are very family oriented. Although this Pirates, you can obviously say, is in a certain respects family oriented. I mean, it's got some things that I think family members would particularly like, but I think it drives into a more bigger audience because I think there's a lot of people out there, especially, young adults and teenagers that would thoroughly much enjoy these kinds of films in particular because they do try to be a little bit more for their demographic. So I think that's also another important thing to note. It's not just the fact that there's pirates, but also because it entails all the things that pirates are known for, and that's usually for a audience that's a little bit more on the adult side rather than the children's fun, happy-go-lucky Disney side. So that's I think something that's definitely important to note. Now, unfortunately, these sequels obviously suffer a lot of issues, and I did briefly address in one of my other previous videos what I sort of would have done with these sequels, but I think the general trend as to why these were in particular popular was the fact that a lot of people liked the whole setup, and I think people liked the whole idea of thinking very kind of outside of the box and, um, trying to be that kind of creative mold that we know from Disney. But unfortunately, I think where these sequels really do suffer is the fact that they are very long-winded, and they not only take up too much screen time for what they are, but they kind of um, the plot just doesn't feel very. It doesn't have a whole lot of structure to it, and there's not a whole lot of focus as to what's going on. And largely and primarily in adventure films, like Indiana Jones, for example, you feel that film's really tight knit. It doesn't try to meander too much, it doesn't try to I think, overstay its welcome, and it tries to be genuinely fun and have that very adventurous spirit to it. And that's why I think a lot of people genuinely enjoy the Indiana Jones films and they come back to them. However, unfortunately, with these ones, I think what really ends up happening is when you put in things that should have really not been put in there for too long. Like they drag out Will and Elizabeth's relationship, I think, way too long. I think almost they shouldn't have had a sequel. I think they were fine just having their nice little pair up within the first film, and then have Jack, who's really the main character, go on a different adventure, meet new characters, etc., etc. That would have, I think, suited itself a lot better, which is what I discussed more in depthly in my other video. But the thing about these sequels, and also why I think they maintained their popularity, is because I think a lot of people were invested in the idea that it would somehow maybe get better, or that the quality would somehow improve upon itself. And I think the second one in particular suckered a lot of people in because it left kind of on a cliffhanger, so to speak. And I think a lot of the reason too why a lot of people ended up ultimately seeing the third and the fourth film was the fact that the fourth film I think it kind of tricked people, because on the one hand, it did try to say, yeah, we're getting rid of all of these other things. Like, we're ending Will's and Elizabeth's story. We're going to bring in all these new characters, but at the same time, we're going to bring in the same problems that kind of existed as far as plot and pacing and all that. And I think that's really why people still kept getting suckered in to see these films. And I think a lot of people are genuinely fans of pirates, and I mean, they love the whole concept of pirates, and I think um, there's a really strong fan base for pirates. And I'm not saying that doesn't have any, that isn't something that's worth not celebrating, but I mean, it's, I think, a major reason as to what drew people into these kinds of films, because they have pirates in them. Pirates are a very big, they're a big staple, I think, as far as when you look at, different kinds of figures throughout history. Romans are really big figures that have existed throughout history, and I think pirates have held their own kind of image throughout history and have been, kind of parts of legends and all of that, and I think that's what really got people invested. And I think it's hilarious though that within the fourth film they actually said, yeah, we're going to bring in mermaids here. And even that is unfortunately kind of underutilized. Even though they do kind of try to make it cool, they sort of, they're not really at the forefront so much, compared to a lot of these other films that try to bring out adventure, because in certain instances within adventure films you kind of expect certain things to come up. Well, why not this comes up? And I think definitely the Mermaids were something that people really did want to see and see what Disney could ultimately do with them. But then I think really, I think the fact that people were still kind of buying into the whole idea of pirates and all that, I think is what really kind of convinced people, oh, okay, I'll give it another try. So it's a it's almost very tricky. It's kind of like going to a restaurant and you sit down first and you're like, oh, this meal's actually good. Let me go another time. Then you come and another time, and then the menu's different and it's not as what you've expected. Um, but you figure, oh, it's probably, you give an explanation for something, and then you come back again, and then it's not what you expect. And then whether or not you choose to go back again, it there's always this part of you that kind of gets reeled into going and sort of spending your money on it. And I think this is kind of what these films actually did a good job of doing, and I think why they got so much recognition. Not from critics, obviously, but from moviegoers, because moviegoers went and saw these films. A lot of money was made by these films. And it unfortunately gandered. Even Disney utilizes the sequels within the ride. I think even now, even though it's not used as much. It's still there. I mean, I like the fact that they use Captain Jack. I think that's cute. But at the same time, they'll use Davy Jones and all these other characters. And although I think that there was a lot of potential with these sequels to really do something with them, I think a lot of it did fall flat because not a whole lot of it was, I think, as executed in the way that the first film was. And it didn't try to branch out and be its own kind of separate adventure. It just kept churning out the same, uh, the same problems over and over again throughout each of these sequels. And largely that has to do with the plot, largely has to do with the overextension of time that is utilized for all of the subplots and scenes that play out. And you ultimately don't really care as much compared to a film that just kind of goes straight to the point, has a clear character, that we follow. And that's why Indiana Jones worked so well. And I like to compare this series to Indiana Jones because it is an adventure type film. And what Indiana Jones does really good of is it doesn't waste its time. And unfortunately, the pirate sequels did waste, I think, a whole lot of time and energy on focusing on things that didn't need to have a whole lot of focus or energy on. And at the expense of what could have been good or well executed. So I think that's really ultimately why these films got so much recognition and why people ultimately ended up coming back for more and more and more, was this idea of, the whole pirates image and the whole idea that Disney was behind this, and also the fact that people wanted to see something that was a little bit non-traditional from Disney. And although, Disney's obviously, I think, done some works that, they're not necessarily for the G-rated crowd, but I mean, at the same time, they've done a good job as far as execution. Obviously, perfect example is the first Pirates film, but unfortunately, the sequels just suffer from a lot of issues and trying to insert a ton of things, and trying to create a sort of not trying to create a separate adventure, not trying to kind of utilize different characters and different material, I think is what really drags these sequels to not being as memorable or as interesting or as good as they could have been. And although initially I'll admit I did like the films when they initially came out, I think that over time I sort of realized the kind of gimmicky nature that was surrounded with the sequels and trying to, kind of get people in and have it be sort of a cash grab, which I think largely these sequels unfortunately became as time went on, instead of trying to be genuinely good adventures. And you know, there's, at least within the first film, I felt there was a certain sense of satisfaction. But within the sequels, you know, you feel like that they're trying to drag it out instead of actually just genuinely making something good and just going out on it, you know. And I even feel like within the fourth one, they're going to try to make another one. They're going to try to push it and trying to get it out there. And unfortunately, I think since these films kind of just, you know, since the fourth film came out a little whiles later, I think it's really what got people to come back, because they didn't really necessarily remember the second or maybe even third film, because it's been so much time that has gone by that you know, that everybody almost forgot about them. And then, you know, just it just started to pick up just naturally, going, oh yeah, I remember Pirates, you know, I should go see that, yeah. You know, so I think that's another genuine reason why they could have kind of gotten away with, you know, making a fourth sequel. But when you look at this, just them in general, I think the large reason as to why they became so overhyped is the fact that it had the Disney label on it, and it had the ride backing up to it, and the fact that pirates are just so iconic, and we really want films about pirates. I mean, I think a lot of people feel like pirates are very underutilized as characters, and I think there can be some genuinely good films that can be made from pirates. And I know Disney can pull this stuff off, but unfortunately, they didn't really do it all too well in these sequels. And I think the fourth one convinced me that I'm not going to expect something that's stellar, even if they make a fifth one, which I don't know if they're even doing now. But you know, it all just comes down to if they want to see if they can milk it or not. And but you know, they made money, and that's the really underlying part of the reason why they, I think, are overpraised, is that despite what the critics said, they still made a significant chunk of change. They got the audiences invested. They, despite, you know, the various efforts beforehand, people still came back for them. And I think that largely has to do with wanting to see good pirate films, and I think that's largely has to do with the Disney brand and all the tons of different factors. But that's just my honest opinion. However, if there are any questions, comments, concerns, I would be more than happy to answer them. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year, and I hope to see you all in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.